they hold a special place in my heart. Um, they sacrificed their lives, they're sacrificed for this community, um, and they touch my life in a number of ways that I can get emotional about, but I'm going to do my best not to. So I appreciate you guys. Take back here. Um, my little girl came to me the other day, and she's like, "Daddy," and I'm like, "What's up, sweetie?" And she's like, "What did the football coach say to the vending machine?" I'm like, "Tell me, sweetie." She's like, "Give me my quarterback." That's good, sweetie. Um, I come to you as a trained physician. I don't come to you as a pastor. I come to you as 15 years of serving this world and this community and doing upper cervical work. Um, I've seen tens of thousands of patients over the years here and also overseas in Nicaragua and Honduras. We've had the pleasure of seeing people, literally their lives being changed. Um, we've seen tumors disappear out of women's breasts. We've seen vertigo stop in its tracks. We've seen diabetes numbers completely normalize. We've seen shaking from Parkinson's disease completely cease. Um, we've seen neurosarcoidosis and the effects associated with it completely disappear. We've seen a lot of things over the years. Um, and I've had the pleasure of serving with my mentor for 4 years. And I just found out a month ago that he's pretty much on his deathbed. Um, there were things that happened in our lives about 10 years ago that God literally cleaved us. Um, there were circumstances that happened. Um, he was King Saul in my life, if you will. And I was a very small David at the time. And it got to a point where God said it was time to go. And when it was time to go, I was gone. But that man meant an awful lot to me because he taught me everything that I know today. Um, and it's funny because over this last month, I thought I was healed from what I went through with him and the circumstances that I went through with him. But I'm learning that I'm still only learning to learn the beginning of what he actually taught me. When it comes to health and it comes to disease, so many people think and learn about what the disease is, and they're concentrating and learning about disease, but they're not learning about life. Medicine is the study of disease and what makes people sick, but I would challenge you to start to learn and think about what makes people healthy, what can get people well. There's been a few things that I've noticed over the years that people have in common that end up getting well, that end up changing their life, that end up living a life differently than what they are living now. So when I talk about people in general. There are always going to be some people out on the fringe that need more than what I'm saying. So take my word for what it is, right? And if you got questions about that, certainly ask Pastor Daniel, ask myself. More than happy to clarify those points for you. Is that fair? So in saying that, I ask for your permission to really be raw. I ask you for your permission to not be diplomatic. I ask for your permission to really speak my heart. Is that fair? Right? One of those things that I see with people that want to get well and want to work on changing their life emphatically is that they're determined without a shadow of a doubt to figure out what's going on. They aren't satisfied with the status quo. They aren't always going to go the way that everybody else goes, right? It's kind of why we're standing here today, right? This is the path less traveled. They're willing to do whatever it takes to work on changing their life, depending on what it is and what they're dealing with, right? Um, Dr. Kale was in Mexico, right, a month ago because he was willing to seek treatment that they weren't willing to give him here. He was willing to go to the ends of the earth to do it. We took care of a patient years ago that came in with cluster headaches, and he had moved to Philadelphia. That didn't work. He came back. He moved to Texas. That didn't work. He had every single one of his teeth pulled. That didn't work. This is all at the suggestion of the people that he had seen, the physicians that he had saw. He had his neck fused. That didn't work. He had his neck fused again. Thank God it wasn't 3 times the charm, right? And that didn't work. And he had gone to Atlanta to figure out what was going on because he saw an ad in the paper about cluster headaches. And he went and saw one of my colleagues that I went on the mission trip with to Nicaragua. Actually, it was Honduras at the time. Dr. Tedder was like, look, go here. And Mitch, for the first time in his life, was able to concentrate. He was able to think. And back in the 80s, he started to put together one of those battleships with like the ropes and painted and cannons and people and all that kind of stuff. And he put it down years ago because he wasn't able to do it. He wasn't able to concentrate. He got into a point where he was ready to kill himself. And once he got the care that he needed, he actually started to build that ship again. There's really only a few things that matter in his life. One was his God, one was his wife, the other one was that ship. And back, it was about 6 years ago, he stopped at my office when I wasn't there. Actually, no, it was probably about 10 years ago. He stopped by my office when he wasn't there and he passed over that ship because he was able to complete it. He said, there's only a few things I care about in this world, and one of them is these. But I give it to you because you were the only one that listened to me. You're the only one that was willing to go the extra mile to work on figuring out what was going on. You're the only one that was willing to step out of the box. Because for us, what we're working on doing is we're working on speaking life into people, right? When the word says that life and death is in the power of the tongue, that's true. Life and death is in the power of the tongue. Your ability to speak life into people is important, but also just the opposite is true. Your ability to be able to speak death is also very important. Right? When we run into people sometimes people run into us, and when they talk to me, their doctors say there's nothing else that they can do. Well, when I hear the doctor doesn't know what else that they can do, that's telling you to run. Because what that means is they don't have any other options. There's got to be ways that you can work on figuring out what's happening with you, to work on figuring out how you can work on changing it. So when you figure out how people work on getting sick, or the disease process associated with it, you can actually work on the disease process of how it can work on changing and how people can work on getting well. Right? There's a reason why people end up developing diabetes. Right? There's often reasons why people end up developing high blood pressure. If you're looking at diabetes, for example, people can work on changing that, right? In most cases, right? There's a reason why that disease process has happened. So if you work on studying that issue and work on studying how it happens, you can work on then beginning to study how it can begin to change. Because if there's been a certain treatment that's been done for a period of time and it's not changing it, then that means that there's something else that needs to be worked on being done, right? If you keep going down the road traveled that's not getting you anywhere, it's time to step off of that road onto somewhere else. And honestly, that's very fearful for people. It takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. Stepping into fear, people ask me, and I actually get asked this pretty often, like, is this something that, like, God gave me? Is this condition that I'm dealing with something that the Father put on my life? Honestly, that's a really good question. My personal belief is no. I don't believe God gives people disease. But what I do believe is that God uses obstacles in people's life to change them. I believe that obstacles are put in people's lives so they can work on changing them from the inside out. I believe that if that obstacle wasn't put in your life, then you wouldn't be who God made you to be. I think every single one of us today could think back on our life of obstacles that were put in our life. When they first came, they were like, man, this is really bad. I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to go that way. I don't want to be dealt this hand. But once they were able to get past that obstacle and they look back on it years later, they realize, you know what? That worst thing that was in the worst part of my life ended up being one of the best places of my life. Because what it did for me, when I was in a few different times, first time I broke my back when I was 11. And the second time is when there was a King Saul in my life with my mentor. It was the desperate, despondent life of breaking my back and being able to barely even move and stand and walk and spit out toothpaste and put a smile on my face that set me on the path to where I am today. It turned me into the doctor that I ended up becoming. But more importantly than that, it put me in front of Jekyll and Hyde. It put me in front of someone who is insanely brilliant, but someone who also had demons in him as well, right? My mentor was a world leader in the work that we do, but you had to pay the price to be able to be around that information. I was emotionally raped for probably about 4 years while I was with him and learned the work that we did and do. There was a point where I was ready to literally drive off of a bridge on my way home one day. Brought me to that point. There's not many people that actually even know that story. But God was doing something in my life for those 4 years. I'm learning now, and it's funny. It's so funny in the sweetness of the Father's love, is that as my mentor is on his deathbed right now, I picked up a book by Gene Edwards. It's called Tale of Three Kings. It's a book that's only about this big, and the chapters are only a page and a half long. What I'm realizing now is that King Saul that was put in my life was there to pull the Saul out of me. It was there to pull out the pieces that the Father didn't want in my life so that I could be a bigger, stronger vessel for him, that I could be his hands and his feet. Is that happening with you? Is that happening in your life? Is that happening with people that are around you? Right? And yeah, absolutely pray about the issue. Pray about what's going on with them. Pray that the cancer is gone. Right? I have a grandmother right now that's got stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Pancreatic cancer is not a good one. You could choose a cancer. It's not something you want to choose. Pray for them. But work on figuring out what else God is telling you during this time. And that time spent with him is time always well spent. And sometimes, you know what, it takes a few minutes to work on hearing or listening or feeling. Sometimes it takes hours to be able to do that. But I'm telling you, you work on pressing into him, he's going to work on pressing into you. Right? Those 4 years that I was working with my mentor, there were times where I literally had nothing else to do and I had no idea who to even speak to because of the torment that I was going through. My wife couldn't understand it. My family couldn't understand it. I certainly couldn't reveal that to my patients. No one could understand it. It was between God and me. And he used that time. I used that time. I worked on going closer to him. I worked on figuring out what possibly he could be doing in this process. And it made me more insightful. It made me more joyous. It made me happier. It made me compassionate. It made a lot in my life that I didn't realize that I wasn't doing before, because again, he was working on pulling out that junk that's inside me that I didn't even know. Right? How he does that, our ways, his ways, I would just have to say that he knows best. And he knows you. He knew every hair in your head. He formed you before you were even thought of. Right? And that's a special place that you have in his heart, and you always will. So what can you work on doing for your sickness? Find out everything about it. Find out everything you can. When you walk into that office, find out more than the actual doctor knows. Because when you understand more, you can work on making changes to work on changing something about it. And then work on figuring out what that actually is. And if you don't know what that is, you work on getting around people that know. And if you're not around people that know better, then you work on finding that information out. It's a quest. It's working on figuring out what's going to be the best result for you. Don't stand by. I don't see passive people getting well, unless it's a miracle from the Father, and that we will always pray for. I see people that are determined. I see people that are hungry. I see people that want something better in their lives. I see those people's lives absolutely changing because they become students of the game. They learn how the body works, how it runs, and how they can work on changing it, right? Are there limitations to matter? Are there limitations to your body? 100%, right? If you've had a stroke or a concussion, damage to the brain, damage to the vessels themselves, there's limitations to that matter, right? Is there limitations to the broken body that just happened in that car accident? There is. But could God heal that? Sure he could. Right? So become a student of the game. Find out what's actually going on to find out how you can actually work on changing that. In the Word, it talks about having faith as small as a mustard seed and how that can work on moving mountains. People need to take a look at how much faith they're actually having in their life to work on moving through that problem, issue, or disease. Like I said before, is that something that God put in your life? I don't believe it is. I don't believe he gave that patient neurosarcoidosis. But what I do believe it was put in his path to work on changing him, right? Whether he brought that issue about himself, I don't really know. But what we could work on doing is changing his life to work on changing his results and changing his path and his future. Because him changing changed his family. Him changing changed his destiny. Him changing changed the generations that come after him, right? And that's what's at stake. What's at stake right now is just not your life, right? What's at stake right now is the generations that are coming after us, right? Those things that are happening and those things that are put before you and you moving through that aren't just there always for you. It's there for your future. It's there for the generations that come after you. Guys, there's things that we will never be able to understand, and there's things that the Father has put in place that we never will until that time comes. Whether we're able to ask him that one day or not, I don't really know, right? But what I do know is that there's going to be a sweetness associated with walking with the Father one day. That those million rooms that he put together for us, we'll be able to do that one day. What else do I see in people? They have a constant thirst and hunger to work on changing what's happening with them. They're not willing to accept the status quo for how everybody else in the end works on changing or lack of change, right? their thought process, and they see themselves as being well. We talked before about how life and death is in the power of the tongue. They already see themselves as what they expect to be, right? That kind of whole as a man thinketh, so is he, right? So what they're working on doing is they're like, okay, I understand that I'm here right now, but they can also already see themselves 20 steps ahead, right? It's a red flag for me when I sit in a consultation and I hear people saying my condition, whatever it is, my tramadol. Oh, we've always taken that, so why would we ever change that, right? That's probably the most destructive phrase in the church itself. We've always done things that way. That's how we're always going to continue to do things. Well, last I checked, the Spirit moves, and it'll continue to move. It'll continue to move our heart and our lives. Well, when people internalize and that condition becomes who they are, their whole world changes. There's two sides to the coin. There's understanding what the condition is and having to make room for it because it's in your life, accepting the fact that there's a condition. But the other side of the coin is allowing that condition to move you away from the path that you're supposed to be on and that God called you to be. We see two different sides. The one side we often see very similar in like autoimmune conditions where the body's working on attacking itself, right? And I understand that. When we take care of a disc issue in the office, we have to get people to understand and admit to the fact that they have a disc problem. They have to accept it. Because if they keep fighting against it and they keep doing what they shouldn't be doing, their body's going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. You hear me? But when we understand and accept the fact there's a condition, we work on learning about the condition and what's happening with it. We see ourselves working on getting well and changing it. And we're determined to do whatever we can to do that. We see those patients work on changing their life. We're known for taking care of migraines and cluster headaches. We had April's about, I would say in her early 40s, I believe. April's had migraines since she was a child. So we're talking like elementary school age. So she grew up with them. She didn't know anything different. For children, oldest child at this point is 23 years old. Her kids have never known her not to have migraines. And we're talking about migraines that like blow out vision, give you nausea, can barely stand up. I mean, make you like not, you can't live life, basically. It gotten to the point where she got a migraine on an airplane, and her 5-year-old was actually carting her through the airport, through like gates and luggage, and like migrating mom where she needed to be because she visually could not see a thing because of her migraines. About like, you know, you talk about like the provision of the Father to like that she was okay, she was able to get home. But that was kind of the last straw for April, as you can imagine. She didn't really know what else to do. And she had been referred a bunch of different times, and she ended up changing her life. And it was one of those moments in the office where it was almost like I kind of heard the audible voice of God, but kind of not. It was kind of like one of those things where I'm thinking a certain way, and I just heard something that completely like knocked off my way of thinking. God speaks to me that way sometimes. And all of a sudden, April was talking, and I just blurted out, April, you need to receive your healing. April, you need to receive your healing. April, you need to receive your healing. This was after about, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 months under care. You know, we had developed a relationship. Some of my some of the people that we take care of, I get closer to than others. Obviously, like Pastor Daniel and I become very close. Some people we don't establish relationship. We were kind of like in the middle. It was kind of like one of those grounds where it was kind of like, is this something that you say to somebody or not? You got me? April, you need to receive your healing. And she just started bursting out crying because that condition had become so much a part of her life that she had altered her entire life based off of this condition, based off of what was going on. Because she had to. Because she was feeling that way. And because she hadn't found anybody else that could work on changing it. Right? It's not me. It's the Father. It's the Father working through us. Right? It's got nothing to do with me, and I hope none of you are taking it that way. And I'll get down on my knees if you are. But that was a word that God spoke to me probably about 2 years ago that I am still like fumbling with. About like, where did that come from? Why at that point? Why was it for April? Or really wasn't it for April? Was it just something that you need to know? Was it something for you guys here today? You need to receive your healing. April worked on figuring out what was going on with her body. April had worked on not accepting the status quo and being prescribed Imitrex and not taking it because it never worked. She'd been through all that, and she was over it. But when she was well, and when she hadn't had a migraine for about probably 8 months at that point, she was still living on the other side. She was still living as if she's. And maybe that was something that God just had to wake her up. Maybe that was something that like God had to impart in me that like that's something that I need to do. That people need to be given hope, but they also need to be told, accept your healing. Let's work on moving your mind away from sick, suffering, and disease, and let's move your mind over to hope, faith, love. Right? Guys, I don't know what that is. I mean, like I said, that happened a while ago. I'm still fumbling with it. I don't know it, and I don't understand it. And I don't understand his ways. Sometimes I do. Like, this whole thing with my mentor, Dr. Kale, man, this is 9 years ago now. He cleaved us. One day we were together, working in the office. The next day there was literally a cataclysmic explosion, and he completely separated us and cleaved us. We've honestly never talked since. It's that. It's one of those late night stories by a fire and maybe a few beers that you have a conversation about. It's kind of one of those stories. I've had the pleasure of watching people get well, and I've had the pleasure of touching people's lives in a number of different ways. And I've seen over the years that the people that work on changing their life have very specific characteristics associated with working on getting what they came to the office for in general. And I see there's an other subset of people that continue to live in that condition and in that issue, and they allow it to define them instead of allowing the Father to define who they are. Right? In this piece over here, where they're allowing it to define who they are, I truly believe that thing is being used in your heart, in your life, and in your family. And is that okay? I think it is okay. Is it something that we bargain for? It's not. Is it something we wanted or desired? It never is. But his ways are greater than our ways. He knows more than we do. He set this whole thing up from the very beginning with just his words, his breath. If he can create that based off of his words and his thoughts and his breath, I think we can trust him with our life and our family's life. He's got a greater plan than we do. The cool thing is that we've got the opportunity to work on learning from that. And the cool thing is that we've got the opportunity to work on touching other people's lives and being part of a community in order to do that. There was a time period where I moved away from being in a corporate church and was really in like a home setting church for a while, where we would kick back on Sundays and just talk about God and talk about life. But he gave us hands, he gave us feet, he gave us mouth, he gave us eyes. And the church body works in different giftings and different pieces to work on being his hands and feet on earth. And that you don't get that. You don't get that from a small, tiny home church where there's only 4 or 5 people. That can only come from being in this setting. That can only come from nurturing that throughout the week, right? And coming together as a group in a corporate setting to work on cherishing the Father and the Father's love. Right? I encourage you to draw nearer to him. I encourage you to understanding how your Father feels about you. I've worked a lot of years in doing this work, and it's very interesting to sit in a consultation when people talk to me, because there's always some kind of level of fear associated with people talking to me. Some people are mad. Some people are angry. Some people laugh. Some people are condescending towards me and my team. Some people are very nonchalant. It's not a big deal. Some people are hypersensitive, where you say hello and they start bawling their eyes out. Right? Right? I've learned. Do you guys hear me? Is the volume okay? Do you need this louder? I've learned over the years to work on shoving that away and work on doing my job and follow the systems that we created, because I know that it's not about me, right? And it's not about literally even the disease that's at hand, right? It's about how do we work on taking this patient and work on making them whole again? And how can we work on imparting into them what they need? And we've been given a very unique gift. A lot of people think we're crazy, we're witchcraft, we're heresy. I mean, the AMA tried to single-handedly destroy my profession decades ago, but they lost because they lied and it wasn't the truth. And the truth will always set you free. Yes, I teach my little girls that. But that fear that people stand in, it's fake. It's not there. It's fabricated. That's the enemy, right? What did you say before when we were worshiping? Not today, devil. Was that what it was? Not today, Satan. Well, how about not ever, Satan, right? We're not ever giving him a foothold. We're not ever giving him a stronghold. We're not ever allowing him to step into our life. So that box that you may be living in, or people living in, right? I see it as my job to work on throwing and thrusting people out of those boxes. My job is to get people to think differently about their current situation. My job is to get people to think about life and not about death. My job is to get people to think about, okay, well, what's actually going right with you compared to what's going wrong with you? Let's talk about what God put in you compared to what Satan is trying to destroy and take away from you. That's what I'm working on doing every single day. I just simply get to have a job that does that every day, which is fun, and we enjoy doing it. But you got to work on finding out what that ministry is for you. And I pray and hope that every single one of you work on finding that, because not everybody's called to be a pastor, not everybody's called to be an apostle, not everybody's called to be a teacher, but we're all part of the kingdom, and we're all part of his hands, feet, eyeballs. They all work differently to work on creating God's plan here on earth. Is that fair? Unless God does a miracle for my mentor, there's a really strong possibility that he may end up dying in the next month. I am in my own journey on figuring out what that looks like what God did in me. I personally have been prophesied that the traits of King David are on my life. And I feel that and see that and are starting to see that there was a King Saul that I could work on standing on his shoulders to work on changing other people's lives. Because Saul at one time was an absolutely incredible ruler who was called by God. But so was King David. But I don't know what that journey looks like, because the passing of my mentor is still the big deal to me. There's still a lot of stuff inside of me that I thought that I really gotten rid of, prayed about, been pulled off, and all kinds of stuff. But now that he's where he's at, there's also this other stuff that's coming up. And there's this book that's been put in my life that comes at a very interesting time. So if you care to know, I'll keep you updated on that. And if you care to, you're more than welcome to update me with what's going on in your life. Pastor Daniel and his dad and the family have my contact information. You're more than welcome to contact me. I'd love to know what's going on with you and see some old friends, as I have always enjoyed speaking here and also being a part of your family.